Hey guys, I'm looking at all of your character head textures, and they're looking pretty good. This is a interesting class because I know everybody is coming in with a pretty wide range of what classes you had previously. So what I want to do, this is, if you look at this, I took the same head, UV mapped it, and then just brought it into Mudbox, which I highly recommend. Now, if you actually have the Maya license, the educational license, you can get Mudbox for free as well. You just have to go log in and download it under your account, and Autodesk gives it to you as a student for free for 3 years, the educational license. So I strongly recommend doing it. I'm just going to do a really quick brief just to show you guys because I didn't know what everybody knew and what they didn't. Um, and so this character here, uh, basically I UV mapped it first inside of Maya. I also smoothed it once just because I really didn't like the poly count on it, and I just wanted it to look a little bit cleaner, so I'm not worried about weird shadows. So I hit smooth once inside of Maya and then brought it into Mudbox as an FBX file. Now, before I show you just a few quick techniques, this is the sort of stuff I'd love to do um, in live lessons if we set up the time, get enough people, and then kind of go through it. And if we go in and we see this, let me just do a quick breakdown. Okay, so I have multiple layers inside of here, okay, including a reflection map. So I'll just start with that first. So I don't know. I know some of you have had Mudbox. I know some of you have not. Mudbox basic navigation is just like in Maya. And before I get to that, let me just show you this teardown first. So, excuse me. Um, I had to give her a material. So when you have the model in, once you've imported it into a new blank area, you give it a material, and I gave it a reflective material so that I could get some nice effects with it, and then I just blackened that whole reflection mask so that it's blacked out except for where areas like a little bit on the lips and on the gold part of the um, makeup, so I can get a reflection on it. But everything else, I don't want it reflective, so it's just blacked out. I do have a bump map. I did some subtle stuff. I was just showing a few people during the last live lesson. Before I get to the incandescence, I want to show you the diffuse breakdown. So I have a skin layer, and this skin layer, I'm not worried about little bleeding around her eyes. I mean, color bleeding, not literally blood bleeding. But just to talk about the texture itself, when we zoom in, I started with a base color that I just flooded her whole face with. Excuse me. And then I started actually adding some blue to it because a fair-skinned person tends to have more of a, I mean, we all do to a certain degree, but you see it more on a very fair-skinned person where you see a blue underline, and that's how we start to get some of the variations. Then I start to go in back to the skin tones and use a brush, and I'll show you in a minute, of just some of these little tools to break it up at a very low pressure and just start to build up on it. And the idea is that I want to have as much variation in the skin so it looks more natural. Once that's done, and I've gotten some areas, I can then, and I've balanced out, and I didn't finish it. There's still some lighter spots, a little more splotchy than I normally like, but spent more time on the face area, and you start going in with the old dodge and burn tool, just like in Photoshop, to pull out the cheeks, get a little highlight on the cheeks and the nose, and then a little burn underneath and in the ears to add a little bit of depth. right? And especially like underneath the eyes as well. After that, I add a makeup layer. Actually, let's do this. I add a makeup layer and another one on top of that. And the reason I do it this way is because these are all separate texture files, and then I can control them. I could even fade them out if I wanted to. So this one right here, so I could have different variations, and I could even pull that down. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Stop that. So I could even dim out its transparency. Okay. I could also change how it's actually being applied, just like in Photoshop. Then I start adding a specular. Excuse me, getting over a bad cold. And this is where I start to add the shininess, and I don't do a flat brush that puts it everywhere. I use these patterns so it has breakup. So this splotchy, like little dots that you see is actually in the specular. I have to tone it down around the eyes a little bit. So black in the specular would be no shine, white would be super shine, colored would be a colored shine, that kind of stuff. And then now if you look at her like this, if I turn on incandescence, watch her face, I'm emulating subsurface scattering on her skin by adding an incandescent layer and painting it a reddish color. And that just pops it out and makes it look like there's light bouncing around in her skin instead of having that dead look. Excuse me. This is why I haven't been making videos. My throat has been killing me. So if we have this, let me just go new scene. Import. And just say keep this mesh. And there she is, the smooth version. So I'm just going to do a very quick one just so you could see the general idea of this. And I'm just going to start with a base color. This is my sculpt. This is my paint. To navigate, it's Alt left mouse button to rotate, Alt middle mouse button to pan, and Alt right mouse button to zoom in, just like in Maya. That's what makes Mudbox so easy. Also, just like in Maya, once I have a brush that I've selected, the letter B, left mouse button allows me to change the size, moving the mouse while I'm holding B and left mouse button. And the letter M, as in Mary, left mouse button, is how much strength. Right? I have to go to my paint layer. I'm going to choose a base tone. Not too dark, not too light. Something in the middle that I can go from. Excuse me. So when I actually go to paint on her, you'll notice it's, because I don't have a paint layer, pops this up. I'm just going to say skin. And I'm going to use a 2048 size texture, and it's the diffuse channel. Boom, it's just my skin. So I also turn on my mirroring for right now. So that means that when I actually paint on one side, it paints on the other side. Turn off steady stroke. Now this could take me a while, so I'm just going to say flood paint layer in the options. That floods the whole layer there. You know what, I might go just a little bit lighter than that. There we go. There we go. There we go. Flood paint layer. There we are. So now I just flooded it with this flat out color, and I'm going to choose my paintbrush, and I'm going to use a stamp. Make sure my Falloff is on the third one. And just so you could see some of these, if I choose this, oops, let me pull that up. Well, haha, would help if I change the color. Doy. So, just so you could kind of see, if I choose like a bluish color, you could see it doing this, but that's actually way too powerful, and it's a little bit a little too light. So I'm going to darken that. Okay. And so now I'm going to say randomize. And that's randomizing rotation, horizontal scale, vertical scale, uniform scale, and contrast. And I'm just going to turn it down a bit. And you can see I'm starting to add some of that in. So as I do this, I could start to add just a little bit of that blue in there. Lower it down some. Just start adding a little bit of a blue underline on underneath the skin, because this is like sort of, and I'm not trying to get it perfect, like flood her whole thing. I'm just trying to get some variance and maybe get a little bit more around the eyes, or the areas that'll be a little darker. And I'm basically just trying to break it up a little bit, have a place to start from. If you start getting this weird seam here, just turn off mirroring for a second, and I can actually hold down Shift, and that smooths or kind of goes to the blur tool. And now I've turned off. And you know what? I'm going to turn on stamp spacing, which means that every time it stamps, it's going to be further out. And that gives me even more, like, a little bit of variance in there. Okay. So I got some blue mixed into there, and now I'll go back to my skin tones that I want on top of that. And if we crank that up just a wee bit, we'll see it. And I can just start to add that in. Now, just so you can see, if I crank it up really high, this is what we're getting. See? And I think I'm going to go a little bit more pink on it, and we'll fix that up. See? But I'm just going to, I could choose these different patterns like that. And I'm just going to tone them down. And this is how I start to get that natural, more natural blotchiness to the skin. Now, one thing as I do this, you'll notice the lighting is a little bit off, so I might take a pause real quick. And I could choose my own light sets. I actually made my own light set, which is something like this. That's only going to work once you actually go and say, oh, you know what, I want this to be a material that's shiny like that. So I chose like a mirrored material, this guy right here, reflective chrome. It doesn't sound like it's something you would use, but depending on how you want it to look, but we're going to mask it out anyway. So just temporarily, I will make a specular. Spec. Yeah, that's good. And then I'll make a reflection mask. And that's going to So the reflection mask I will change to black. And the specular for now, I will also change to black because I want to go in and put those in manually. So she's very matted right now. We're going to have to put the shine back into her. And now I go back to my skin tone, and then I start to go in Now we could see, if you notice, you see I'm starting to get that breakup of the skin that's looking a lot more realistic because I'm combining these. And that can potentially give me some nice effect. And I can always go back and tweak some things out. It's a good idea if you like save a few. I'm getting a much, much nicer variation of skin. I can always crank it up just a little bit. I'm not going to do the whole thing, but you get the idea. Then I can crank it up a little bit more for areas. And I want to add just a little bit of extra color too. I'm not trying to like flood it with a solid color. I'm just trying to add just a little bit of color to these areas. Save time, I'll use the mirror. Get a little bit of color into some of these areas that you would see. Don't forget the back of the head, unless you're going to put hair on top and stuff. And you can see I'm getting a nice start to my base. And then I can go into my dodge and my burn. My burn acts like it does in Photoshop, where if you go in with a low pressure, you could start to darken a little bit, recede those eyes just a little by darkening. And you could even do that to the lips a little bit, around the nose. It's a lot easier. You don't want to like, oh, I'm just going to paint inside the nose black, because it's kind of scary. So, but we see, and then I go in and I use that burn tool to start to go in. And for here, because I want it a little more controlled, I'm going to change my Falloff to a point, so it's sharper in the center. And then I can kind of go in darken some of these areas here to add a little bit of depth to those ears. And I'm doing this just because, like I said, I'm not sure how much. I know everybody, and I found out more so afterwards, has a wide range of experience of texturing, and all of you are at a good start. But man, you could just get that one I showed you earlier. I did in about 45 minutes. I'm not going to spend as much time on this one, or at least I'm trying not to. I just want to show you some text, a little bit of technique. Use the burn tool, just put a little bit underneath here. This one I'll go back to the normal fall off. Tone it down. One thing you'll notice is I have it spread out so that it's not just doing it in a straight line like that. So I have it spaced out, and that gives me, and it's random. Whoops, it should be random. There we go. To give me a little bit more. That's why it was a little bit more difficult. And you can see I'm starting to develop a little bit more. If she was a little old lady or something, or super fair skin, I could even go in with this stamp of the leaves, give it like a bluish tint. Oh man, look at that. Check that out. See? So you could even have a little more veins. If somebody's really fair skin, you can see that a little bit in certain areas. You don't want too much, but just so you could kind of see. Look at that. Okay, stop that. Okay, so, but just so you could see, if I crank it up too high, then you get this. And that's a bit much. Everything is subtlety. So it's like low pressure, slowly build up, and you get some really nice little details. And then I can go into my dodge tool and start to lighten and pull out. And I could change midtones, highlights, or shadows, whichever one you're trying to affect. Excuse me. Okay. And then the last thing, just to kind of show you, if we're going to do like the incandescence and the makeup. So right now she still has a little bit of the dead look, so I'm going to do the incandescence. I'm just going to call this one SSS for subsurface scattering, and this is going to go in the incandescence. I'm going to switch this over to the red, like sort of a reddish pink, and I'm going to go to my paintbrush. I'm still using a pattern, a stamp. I'm just going to slowly just start to pull that. You know what? It needs to be a little more red. It needs to be toned down even more. And if I see it, do you see that off and on? It starts to pop it out just a little bit. Put it in the cheeks. Use it to lighten the nose a little bit. Excuse me. And definitely for certain parts of the ear. So I tighten that up. This is how you would get that effect where it looks like light's coming through the ear. Let's crank it up just a little bit. A little bit on the brow. Okay, so she's looking not too bad. And then I could go into my specular and use like these little dots, just so you see if I crank it up really high, you see you get this where it's a shine. So I'm going to use a much lighter pink and a much less intensity. Just add just a little bit. If you wanted to add beads of sweat, you could do that. Excuse me. And this is how I can add that. If I don't, I could just literally go in and I could paint in shininess if I wanted to, like where it's wet around the eye or something like that. But it's good to use some sort of a pattern, just so it's not quite so strong. Excuse me. That's looking good. I darken the inside of there. Another thing you could do, turn on ambient occlusion. Check that out. That's looking nice. And what was I want to show? Oh, so if she is wearing makeup, it's the last thing. I'm going to make a new layer in my diffuse. Call it Makeup 1. We'll put this in the diffuse. And I'm going to tighten up my brush. And let's use a pool. Actually, let's paint the color first. I'm going to turn off ambient occlusion for right now because it does sometimes chug things a little bit depending on what your settings are. And I'm going to, in the brush setting, I'm going to turn off this guy for a second. Let's see, let me use steady stroke. What do I got so far? Let's say, oh yeah, let's do a gold first. Let me use a darker color for the gold, like a brownish color actually. And when I have my stamp spacing, or excuse me, my steady stroke on and it's set to about 4, when I click and drag, you'll notice it goes, and it makes it a lot easier for me to actually paint, see? So I'm going to crank that up relatively high, and this makes it a lot easier for me. And this is going to be where the gold is going to be on her eye. Let's make sure. Oops. There we go. Just do both at the same time. Okay. Now the cool thing, this is on a layer all by itself. I'm not too worried because I'm gonna put black on top of it, the outline. So I'm just doing the paint color for right now, and I jump out and check and see how that looks. Say, okay, you're gonna start from about here. And this is on a layer, once again, all by itself. Now I'm gonna choose a strong blue. And I could change what my fall off is, so I could have it that it has a hard edge like that, but I don't like them that much. That's a little better. Excuse me. So sorry. Hacking, hacking, hacking. Now the cool thing, since this is a layer all by itself, I could actually just go with the eraser, and since I'm on that layer, I could just clean it up however I want it. See? To get it nice and clean. Go back to that eraser. Zoom. Shape this a little bit the way I want it. There we go. That looks cool. I can even add like a lighter blue on the top to get the idea. Now I would go in with a paintbrush and I could add a new layer. And this is where I'd go to pitch black. I'm going to turn off stamp spacing. Crank that puppy up. And once again, I'm not too worried if it's a little bit off, because guess what? I will be able to clean it up after. And how would I clean that up? I just take the eraser. It's big enough. There we go. There. Now I can get a much cleaner effect from that. See? Have a little red in there. Tighten the brush up. Literally follow where that edge is, however thick I want it to be. And the last thing, you get the idea. And the last thing would be like, oh, I want this to be shiny gold. So I would go in, choose like a yellowish color, go back to my reflection mask. And it could be white actually, but I'm going to turn off steady stroke. Just make this part shiny. And I just continue going. But hopefully this gives you a good idea of just doing some quick skin, and you can get some really nice effects going and painting. And if you're interested, let me know and I can make more stuff on it. But I didn't know how much you guys knew or didn't know, and some people had Mudbox experience and some didn't. And it's just such a quick tool to be able to generate and get a quick character texture that it actually works really well.